Good evening. For those of you who have not yet met, my name is Melissa Giller. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for the Reagan Foundation, and thank you for joining us this evening. In honor of our men and women around the country who protect our freedom, can you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we get started, there's a few people I'd like to recognize this evening. We have Bret's wife, Amy, with us tonight. And the Reagan Library Director, Duke Blackwood. We are fortunate tonight to have with us the chief political anchor from Fox News Channel, Bret Baier. His show, Special Report with Bret Baier, is the #1 news program on cable television. He's reported from 74 countries, including 12 times from Iraq and 13 times from Afghanistan. He had the only interview with President Obama during the week leading up to the historic health care vote in the House of Representatives in March of 2010. By the way, in speaking here tonight, Bret has now not only interviewed the following people, but he joins them, as everyone in this list has spoken at the Reagan Library: President George W. Bush, Vice President Cheney, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, Polish President Lech Kaczynski, and Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili. But the man who is here to speak with you tonight is not here as a political reporter, a talented interviewer, or a world traveler. The man who is here to speak with you tonight comes to you as a father. Bret and Amy had their first child in 2007, and they named him Paul. When Paul was 1 day old, he began to turn pale. What at first was thought to be a bacterial infection was instead diagnosed as 5 serious congenital heart defects. Without immediate surgery, he was going to die. Paul had his first heart surgery at only 12 days old and his second at 10 months old. He has since had 7 angioplasties and stomach surgeries, and more surgeries await him as he continues to grow. But Paul and his family are fighters, and Paul is an active and growing boy. In fact, his birthday is this week, we believe. The book that Bret is here to speak about tonight chronicles Paul's journey. I encourage you to purchase the book from the lobby right over here if you haven't already, and get it signed after tonight's program. 100% of the proceeds Bret receives from the sale of the book goes to nonprofit pediatric health causes. We'll be selling the book through the signing. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bret Baier.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It is a real honor to be here. We just took a tour of the museum. It's a spectacular place. We had never been here. And it was just wonderful to go through and see all of these exhibits, and the view is unbelievable. I'm going to take some questions after we do the just a little presentation here, and so get those questions ready. Very fair and balanced and unafraid. But I can answer some questions right now. First of all, yes, Charles Krauthammer is that brilliant. 2, Shannon Bream is that attractive. My beautiful wife, Amy, here, she does not get upset when Megyn Kelly calls me her TV husband. And no one punches Juan Williams in the commercial breaks. Steve Hayes, nobody. It's very cordial. I pass on my regards from my boss, Roger Ailes. He gives his best, and also from Charles Krauthammer, who I told I was coming out here, and he came out here recently on his book tour, and he said, "You were very hospitable, and I can see why." He's, by the way, a great friend, and as if you ended up coming out here for that event, has a great sense of humor. And one of the things you don't hear is that he's also a really great person who reaches out to people. He was one of the first people who called when my son had to go into surgery after he was born. He's a good friend. And I recommend, if you hadn't seen that hour we did on him, the hour special, it gives you a little bit of a glimpse of Charles Krauthammer behind the scenes. If you go to a baseball game, it's like going to a doctorate on baseball. He knows so much about baseball, it's pretty amazing. A funny thing about being here at the Reagan Library, one of the starts of my love of politics came from Ronald Reagan. In 1987, I was student council president at Marist High School in Atlanta, and we traveled to Washington, D.C., and we went to the Rose Garden for a presentation from Ronald Reagan on a School of Excellence award. And I traveled with my headmaster, Father Joel Conzen at the time, and stood in the Rose Garden and accepted this award with a lot of other schools. Being there made me appreciate just the grandeur of the White House and how wonderful it was. After the event, Sam Donaldson was yelling questions at President Reagan as he was walking back into the West Wing. And at the time, it was about Supreme Court Justice nominee Robert Bork and whether he was going to drop the Bork nomination that particular week. And President Reagan turned around and answered Donaldson after he was yelling questions at him. Well, I was so upset that this reporter would have the nerve to ask a question of a president as he's doing this education event. How dare he? So I went back to my school in Atlanta and I wrote an op-ed in our school paper saying how upset I was about Sam Donaldson interrupting this event. 19 years later, I was in that Rose Garden yelling questions at President Bush as he was walking back into the West Wing. I also joked with Sam Donaldson at the New Hampshire primary. I told him the story, and he said, "So how many times have you yelled at him?" And it was all about getting questions. It's a real pleasure to be here. I emailed a friend in Washington, Tony Dolan, who used to be a speechwriter for President Reagan. I helped write some speeches. And I said, what are some good stories that kind of depict something on a broad theme about Washington, kind of inside baseball about President Reagan that I could relay? And he said this. He said, Ronald Reagan's staff, along with the Marine Orchestra, greeted him on his first full day of work as president in the West Entrance Hall of the White House. As he and First Lady Nancy Reagan appeared on the staircase leading down from the family quarters, they were greeted by the Marine Band and by standing ovation applause for 5 straight minutes. The Reagans stopped on the landing halfway down the staircase, waved, and acknowledged the greeting. And while the crowd quieted down, the new president spoke, and he said this: "Listen, I just want you to know that I have told the people in charge that it will not be necessary to have me greeted every morning on the way to work by the entire staff and the Marine Corps band. Although I appreciate the hail to the chief." The beauty of that story is that Reagan never took himself too seriously. And in office, you could see that, how it translated. In Washington, we could use a little bit more of not taking ourselves too seriously across the board, not left or right, media. It's a good lesson to learn to go forward. I tell my staff that it's like drinking from a fire hose, being in charge of this political show that we have, Special Report. As you know, I took over for Brit Hume now 5.5 years ago. It's been a great run. He's my mentor and friend, and believe me, when I came from chief White House correspondent to take over as anchor of that show, it was pretty daunting. In fact, I spent the first few days looking at the graphic to make sure they said, "with Bret Baier," because any time it could, I wasn't sure. But it was a real honor. Brit had built this show as a foundation of how a political news show, world news show, I think, really the equation worked with the panel at the end of columnists and journalists who'd covered Washington for decades collectively, and a show that matched network news at the beginning. And we took that and just built on that foundation. We've been the #1 news program on cable for all of my time, and before that at Brit's time. Don't tell O'Reilly that he's not a news show. But he's not, technically. We've had great success, and it's because of the people. When Bret left, and he's not left, he's with us for 100 days a year as senior political analyst, and I'm just blessed to have him because he provides great insight. But when he left the anchor chair, he told me one thing. He said, "It's not about you. It's about the news. It's about the news that drives the day." And the correspondents we have, James Rosen, Jennifer Griffin, Jim Engel, Carl Cameron, these people are breaking news every day. And it may take the rest of the media a little longer to catch up, but eventually the stories are big enough that they get covered across the board. They've been doing amazing work, and we're very proud. The reason I'm here is because this is kind of the roundabout end of a book tour. Finally made it out to the West Coast, and happy to be here. Special Heart, my first book, opened at #9 on the New York Times bestseller list. Very happy about that. And the book starts off talking about my career and how I got to Washington, and then goes through my courting of my wife, some stories that she turned to me and said, "Are we sure we want to tell this story?" And that's how you introduce us. Very quickly, I started as an intern with Bernie Shaw at CNN. I wrote for that show, Inside Politics. I wrote, "Welcome to Inside Politics, I'm Bernard Shaw." That's basically what I wrote. I also got him his popcorn during the commercial breaks. I always wondered why he chose popcorn, with the kernels, and not really an anchor food in between commercials. But I saw him at a charity event a couple years ago, and I said, "Bernie, I was your intern. I got you your popcorn during your commercial breaks." And he said in his really low baritone voice, "So who gets you your popcorn now?" I thought about it. I actually thought about getting popcorn after that. I bounced then from there to Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. I called myself the Hilton Head Bureau Chief, but I was really just a one-man band, photographer, editor, reporter, all in one, covering these huge stories like loggerhead sea turtle nesting and what color the azaleas would be in the median, those kinds of things. I went from there to Rockford, Illinois, an NBC affiliate. I was there for 10 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. Really loved Rockford. Went from there to Raleigh, North Carolina, a huge affiliate, a CBS affiliate, WRAL. My first day there, it was a tornado that we covered. Hit a trailer park. Fortunately, nobody died, but as we were there, a second tornado came in, and we were running with the camera guy down into a ditch as everybody is trying to get out of the way of the second tornado. Fortunately, it missed that trailer park, but I started doing live shots for stations around the country my first day at WRAL, and I was on the CBS Morning News the following morning. So as first days go, that was a big one. I was there for a couple of years, and then I started with this startup news channel, Fox News Channel. In fact, nobody knew who we were. The Atlanta Bureau started in my apartment with a fax machine and a cell phone. True story. And as I say in the book, maybe some pizza combos and Diet Coke. I think that was in there too. But I basically bounced around the Southeast and South and Central America, hiring crews and doing stories and feeding them up to this mothership in New York, Fox News Channel. And nobody knew who we were. I'd call for interviews and they'd say, "So wait a second, are you the Simpsons Network?" I'd say, "No. Have you heard of Bill O'Reilly?" At that point, they hadn't really. Over time, it became a real success. And I could tell when I traveled to Arkansas to do a story, and I was leaving the airport in Little Rock, and someone came up to me, a lady, and she said, "You're Bret Baier with Fox News Channel." And I said, "Wow, yeah, I am." And she said, "I love your channel because you report and I decide." And I said, "Marketing, this is working." This thing is catching on. I was the Atlanta bureau guy for 4 years, and we built out and kept on growing. 9/11 happened, and I was called up to back up in New York and be a backup reporter as the second plane hit. The third plane hit, I was rerouted to the Pentagon, and I started doing live shots for Fox affiliates around the country with the burning Pentagon behind me. And I did that for a few weeks. And then they asked me to be the Pentagon reporter. We hadn't staffed the Pentagon full time. We had rotated people in. I said, sure. And that started my journey in Washington. I never went back to Atlanta. They packed up my place. I found an apartment, and then I was there, traveling with Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and many others. From there, became chief White House correspondent and then took over for Bret 5.5 years ago. So it has been an amazing career. In there, I met my lovely wife, Amy. She came in town on a blind date. Fortunately, I have a good friend. And we hit it off immediately. I knew, though, definitively that I had married the right person. When I wanted to surprise her, and she was coming back in town weeks later, and it was her birthday, actually. And I said, this is going to impress her. I was, at that point, Pentagon correspondent. And I had been invited by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs to a dinner that was to welcome in the new members of NATO, the defense ministers and their military leaders. So at that point, it was 8 countries coming into NATO. I thought, this is really going to show off my stuff. And so I bring her in, I pick her up at the airport, I say, we're going to this kind of fancy dinner. She looked great, we walked in, they said, Mr. Baier, you're at table 1 with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Ms. Hills, you are at table 8 with the Estonia Defense Minister and the leader of the military. And I am thinking, what am I going to do? I just dropped the ball here. I'm trying to seal the deal. And it was not a good thing. I started to sweat. I went to table 1. I tried to, do some fair and balanced conversation, but every time I was looking over my shoulder saying, what is happening at table 8? I can only imagine, the questions about Russia joining NATO or what the nearest, problem is in the region. And every time I looked over my shoulder, table 8 was laughing their head off. They were just guffawing at one point and just having a blast. So I finally excused myself from table 1, and I made my way to the restroom, and I kind of leaned in. I said, Aim, is everything okay? She said, yeah, everything's great. They love me. And I said, well, what are you doing? She said, well, every time they ask about something military or defense, I just change the topic. We've talked about Broadway and shopping and television. And I said, this is the woman. She can handle all aspects of Washington. Fortunately, it did work out. The courting worked. I ran the gauntlet with her 3 brothers and a protective father, and she said yes. We had an idyllic life. We were in Georgetown. My career was booming. We had a great place to live, and obviously a gorgeous wife, and we were having a blast. We then found out that Amy was pregnant, and we found out it was going to be a boy. And, that's cloud 9. So she had a wonderful pregnancy. No warning signs. No nothing. We gave birth to Paul Francis Baier. I actually didn't give birth. Amy, let me be precise on that. Amy actually gave birth. I just held hands or I don't know what I did. So at the first 24 hours, it was amazing. It was blissful. We were in this hospital room, and I'm sure parents here can remember meeting your first child and that really wonderful time. And you just wanted the world to stop because that was perfect. And about 24 hours in, a nurse noticed that Paul was turning pale. And we didn't know what a new baby looked like or what the right color would be. But he was turning pale. They thought it was a bacterial infection. They took him for some tests, and they put out a page for a cardiologist just in case to do some tests on his heart. It just so happened at that time, one of the top cardiologists in the world was driving by the hospital, Sibley Hospital, where we were. He came in, did the tests, and found out that Paul had 5 serious congenital heart defects. And he needed to have really complex surgery within a number of days or he would die. So he came into our hospital room and told us that news. So you can imagine going from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows in that time. And it was really overwhelming, really tough, to the point where when we transported him to Children's National, where he was going to have surgery, Amy at one point became overwhelmed. Obviously, she had just given birth and collapsed. She became the oldest patient at Children's National. So we were running down the hallway. Amy's on a gurney. The baby is, deteriorating. As a number of days, his oxygen's going down. We're waiting for the surgeon to come over from overseas. And I remember sitting in that emergency room together, and we finally were at our low point. And we said we needed to be the parents that Paul needed us to be. And we were going to trust the doctors, and we were going to trust God, and we were going to pray a lot, and we were going to trust our family was going to help us through this, and we were going to turn it around. And that's what we decided to do. And so we came up with the mantra at the end of every day, a teary high five, where we said, we are one day closer to getting Paul home. And that became our deal, how we were getting through it. And there were a lot of bumps and hurdles along the way. We almost lost him numerous times. But the surgeon was fantastic, Dr. Richard Jonas. He reworked the way Paul's heart worked, a heart the size of a walnut. He retooled it, moving arteries the size of angel hair pasta around, re-sewing it so that it could beat the right way. The way that it was fixed was with a donated baby aorta. It basically looks like a little macaroni noodle, but it enables Paul's heart at that time to pump blood the right way. So because it didn't grow with him, that would have to be replaced. As Paul recovered, we had 2 more open heart surgeries and 7 angioplasties. So 3 families have lost their children so that our child could live. That gives you perspective. That gives you a sense of what's important. At the end of this, it's a wonderful story because Paul is bouncing off the roof. We just left him. We just talked to him on the phone. He was kind of beating up his 4-year-old brother Daniel, but tried to prevent that. He has more energy than you would never know on the playground. That this kid's been through 3 open heart surgeries, 7 angioplasties, and a stomach surgery unrelated to his heart. He's doing fantastic. And what the whole thing taught me was I was the communicator throughout this. I sent emails to family and friends to keep them up to date. And that, as we looked back over the years, I collected all of them and I kept notes, and I thought, that could be a book to help somebody out. Everybody has something. Everybody has some challenge, something. This is how we got through our something. And so I decided to start writing, and with the help of a Capitol Hill producer who used to work for Fox, we compiled everything, and I think came up with what could help other families going through tough times, no matter what those tough times are. And we're going to raise a lot of money for pediatric heart disease research and treatment around the country. We are very close to some big breakthroughs, and we're going to fund them. And it's already starting. It's already started. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for coming out. I'm happy to take any questions, and whatever they are, I'll answer them. How about that?
Thank you for sharing your story with us. That
Sure.
was great. We're just going to ask that if you have a question, you raise your hand. A staff member will bring a microphone to you. We are live streaming in the back of the room, so if we don't have a microphone on you, the camera will not pick up your question. So we'll start right back there.
Yes, sir.
Bret, with the best news, political news, world news show on television, bar none, broadcast or cable.
Thank you.
Why can't we get Fox to run you a second time in the nighttime hour when some of us are up late?
This is live streaming, right?
Yes.
I'm going to make that appeal. I continue to make it all the time. And we're going to try to do it. As of now, the commercials we have to push out here are set the DVR. I know that's not what you all want to hear, but we're going to work on getting another time overnight. East Coast time. Yeah. No, overnight East Coast. It'll be evening here. We're working on it.
There's a question over here.
Yes, one of the few blemishes on the President Reagan's otherwise illustrious career or presidency was the controversy surrounding the Iran-Contra scandal. I never did quite understand it, but I noted some comments about it upstairs, but perhaps you could shed some light on that. And I did have a second question, and I'll wait and hear what you have to say about this first one. You having been with both CNN, CBS, NBC, and now Fox News, I'm wondering if ever you were directed to give a liberal or a conservative slant, either way. I'd be curious to hear what your comments are along those lines.
Sure. The second one's easy. No. I'm hired to be the news guy. And the beauty of Fox is that we, like a newspaper, have an editorial side, like an editorial page would have, and a news side. And there's not the top-down guidance is that we cover the news. Now, do we cover stories that other networks don't cover? Yeah, there are a lot of them. And does that indicate a slant? I don't think so. I think it is an indication about what is news and the kind of groupthink of Washington. There's not a dictate that we cover anything any way on the news side. To your first question, I think there have been many different investigations into Iran-Contra, and whether they satisfied people's answer or questions during that time, a lot of people said they didn't. I would liken some of the questions to investigations that are ongoing now, that there are many investigations in Washington that don't come to an end. Iran-Contra had a conclusion. This does not seem like it's coming to an end on some of these investigations that are currently ongoing. And you look at the list. IRS, there's a hearing at this hour about missing emails that suddenly went from a hard drive. Benghazi, that investigation is continuing with a committee that will begin its work in September. Fast and Furious never really came to a conclusion. It's still an open investigation. The VA is a big problem, and it's being investigated, but it is still ongoing. So to the point of your question, I think there is some frustration in Washington, period, with the way investigations are going.
There's a question back there.
It's great to see you here.
Thank you.
My question is, with whatever influence you may have in Washington today, I would ask that you would maybe approach members of the House and the Senate and our leaders and ask them if they want to see a true measure of a leader, come visit the Ronald Reagan Library and see what it's about.
You know, let me just add this. I talked to that speechwriter. He said one of Reagan's favorite showbiz stories was this, about a hardened theatrical agent who was auditioning a young performer in the theater. And the agent says, "Okay, kid, let's see what you can do." And the kid takes off from the stage. He flies up to the ceiling. He flies over to the balcony. He flies, does a flip, lands back on the stage. So the agent sits there. He doesn't say anything at first. Then he moves his cigar from one side of the mouth to the other, and he says, "Okay, kid, but what can you do besides imitating a bird?" Point of the story being, sometimes you don't see the big changes that are happening. And this museum kind of depicts the changes that happened in 8 years under Ronald Reagan. And sometimes it took a little longer to fully appreciate how far the world came, not just the U.S., but the world, and how far it changed. At Fox, you know, we've been #1 for a long time. And sometimes you don't have the perspective of, there's a lot of agents out there moving the cigar from one side to the other. Let's just say that.
I believe there's a question back there.
Excellent reporting on Benghazi. So thank you very much for bringing that information to us. What was your first clue that it was not responsible, or video was not responsible for the events taking place there?
So we had talked from the very beginning with intelligence people on the ground. And they were telling us that they were putting up the chain, that it was not a video, that there was no protest. We reported on, I think it was September 18th, that there was no protest outside, and that the guys on the ground, including the station chief, were saying that there was no real focus on that video. So I guess the important part about it is that all of this stuff about talking points and what was said when, the people inside the intelligence community are really angry. They can't really speak out, but they're not pleased with how this has all gone. And I think you're going to learn a lot more about it in coming weeks, which is hard to believe. I mean, we're coming up on 2 years afterwards. But listen, we'll continue to cover it. It's a tough story because some people glaze over. You know, they kind of just glaze over, and you have to present it from the beginning and say what happened and what didn't happen. But investigations like that continue.
We're going to go over here.
Yeah.
Oh, right there. Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to say I really enjoyed your interview with Hillary Clinton.
Oh, thank you.
Yours and Greta's. The comment was made that this was a heavily negotiated interview, and I was wondering if you could give us any background on the heavily negotiations.
Sure. That's a great question. Do you work for CNN or? The negotiation was about time, how much time we would get, and that it would be split between Greta and myself. That was the only negotiation point. There were no other points. We could have done and asked whatever we wanted to ask, however we wanted to ask it. It was in our prerogative how we came up to the questions. I worked with Greta. She wanted to handle certain aspects, and I, with my limited time, wanted to work on other things. So that was really the negotiation. I started talking to Bob Barnett, who was Hillary Clinton's book agent, well known in Washington, and with the Clinton people a long time ago. And I thought we were heading down a one-way, one-person road. Greta, unbeknownst to me, had her own track going at the same time, and I think it actually worked out well. I think I work well with Greta. She's a great lady. She has the office right next to me, and she's a good person. So I think the overall fallout from it was good. I did receive some emails, many of them, and tweets and comments, but we're happy with it. Thank you.
There's a question over here.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Brett. Thank
Hi.
you for being here. My name's Erin.
Hi, Aaron.
On the Hillary theme, I want to know what was the question you didn't get to ask?
How much time do we have? There were a lot of questions that I didn't get to ask. One of my favorites was, are Democrats to blame for any of the gridlock on Capitol Hill? And how, specifically? The other was more about the economy. How would she, if she decides to run, how would she govern differently than her husband or than President Obama? We'll get there. There's some debates down the road, you never know. I had a list of other questions. I wanted to ask more about some foreign policy and the Iraq situation with the Status of Forces Agreement. How much could she have pushed that across the finish line? I think that's really a big question for her as Secretary of State, now looking at Iraq that is deteriorating by the day. We got some of that in Greta, and you know, it's always a matter of time. It's just always a matter of time, and you want more time. I had 7 minutes and 7 minutes, and you know, when one of these answers goes 3 minutes, you look at your list and suddenly it's shrinking before your eyes. Quick story about that. You mentioned the President Obama interview in 2010 before the health care law bill was voted on in the House. We originally negotiated 30 minutes for that interview. Speaking of negotiations, with the White House. The day of, they said, okay, we're going to give you 25. And then we said, great. So we set up in the Blue Room. We were going to do it as live, so start the show like that. Welcome to the White House, and then start the interview. And the president walked in and he said, well, we're going to do this for 15, right? And I said, Mr. President, we'll take whatever time you can give us. And we went from there. But I had a stack of papers and emails from all over the country. And the first question I asked, the answer was 5.5 minutes. And the second question was 4 minutes in the answer. Now, on my camera view, there was a staff member, an aide, with an iPhone ticking back from 15 minutes. So it's like that 24 show, you know, they're beep, beep. Which is why I had to kind of step on the gas a little bit and ask a little bit more probing questions.
We're going to go over here first.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I am a young man with a heart condition myself. I've had 2 open heart surgeries.
Have you really?
Numerous other surgeries, yes.
How you doing?
Not too bad. We fight, so.
Yeah.
I want to say congratulations first off on getting past these first hurdles from being there myself. I know it's unbelievable. My question is, because of my experiences when I was younger, I understand that a lot of times, especially with the scar, a lot of things come up, especially with teasing and with kids nowadays. We're not the nicest of folks. Have you had to have those type of talks with your son? If so, what was that you brought forward to him to kind of deal with those situations and not feel like he was so out of place at the time?
That's a great question, and God bless you that you're doing well. He's 7, coming up to be 7 this week. Actually, next Saturday, Sunday, the 29th. Good thing my wife's here. So we were really concerned about that, really concerned, because this past open heart surgery, which was in September, was for us the most difficult because he could talk to us, he could tell us how he was feeling, he had emotions, he asked me about dying and mortality. This is tough stuff, and we had always told him that whenever he goes into the hospital that he gets superpowers because he gets his heart fixed and he can run faster and jump faster. Eventually, the expiration date on the superpowers line is probably going to come to an end. But one of the things we did was we tried to empower him. So we brought his cardiologist into his kindergarten class, and she handed out stethoscopes. And she told them what the surgeon was going to do. And before you know it, Paul owned it. And he started taking questions. He held his own press conference. He's like, yes. What's the worst part? Yucky medicine. Next. You know, and the fourth person in said, when can we eat the donuts that your mom brought? You know, it was like, and then at the end, he lifted up his shirt and he showed them his scar. And they were like, wow, cool. And we've told them for years that chicks dig scars. So we try to empower him, and I think he feels like he owns it. He's worried though. We went through this book tour, and they played some videos about all his surgeries, and he was on a couple of interviews, including the Today Show, and he gets emotional about looking back. So I think this is the end of our book tour, and we're going to stop talking about it and let the book talk for itself, and we're going to live as a child and have some fun.
Sticker just came up. Hey, Bret. Thank you for responding to my tweet this afternoon. That
Oh,
was very
fantastic.
nice. Yes, about
I
your
do
book
do that.
signing. You do.
And I tell people I'm one Twitter rant away from a real problem with Fox. But
That's why my husband's not on
Okay,
Twitter.
good.
But anyway, we already saw a special report today. We couldn't leave the house before we saw it. 2 words came up in the panel that required Shannon to look them up in the dictionary. You'll want to know.
Was George on or
Charles
and Jonah?
Charles and
Yeah,
Jonah. Dent was one of them, and sub rosa, and I didn't know what it meant either. Anyway, my question to you is, did you ever get an explanation from the doctors as to why Paul's heart was formed that way? And also, when you were approaching your second son, what was the, testing you went through?
Yeah.
Thanks.
No is the answer to the first question. We didn't have any history in our families, either of our families. And there wasn't anything that stood out, environmental or the way her pregnancy went, Amy's pregnancy. So the amazing part about this is 1 out of 100 kids in the U.S. is born with a congenital heart defect. 1 out of 100. So I don't know how many people are in this room, but 1 out of 100. And half of those have to have a surgery or procedure in the first 6 months. So that stat alone, whenever I say it, is just eye-opening. So it's happening more and more. Why it's happening, they're trying to get an answer to that. When we had our second son, Daniel, first of all, it took us a long time to get to the point where we were going to have a second child because we were scared. And fortunately, and thanks to the guy upstairs, he's fine. He's doesn't have any problems whatsoever. But we were tested, genetic tested, the whole thing. But we're blessed. Amy had the privilege of having a normal, kid in the crib, waking up in the middle of the night, kind of normal pregnancy, and instead of being in a hospital at the beginning. Yeah.
We're going to go back here.
Okay.
Bret.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to know who you would like to see in the White House next.
Thank you for the question.
You're welcome.
Did you have another one? Yeah. I don't say who I would support one party or the other. I'm a registered independent, and so obviously I don't share my views and opinions. I don't think it's right for me to do that, to be fair. I really don't. To be a fair news guy, I really don't. Now I can tell you who is, the odds-on favorite, and I can tell you which party is well positioned. But as far as who I want in the White House, I'm not going to tell you that. Sorry.
Plus, we're live streaming. We're going to go back there.
Of all the various shows that we see on Fox News, do any of you, the various shows, get together with each other and cross-pollinate in any way? Sometimes I'll be...
Where's this question going?
Well, sometimes I'll be watching one of the Five or you or Riley or whatever, and they'll come up with something. I'll say, yes, that's right on.
Yeah.
And the next show comes along, and they act like they haven't got a clue what the answer is. Is there any back and forth between the groups? And kind of with that, what is the relationship between FNC and FBN? Yeah. Is there any back and forth between those?
Yes. Second question first. I use a lot of the folks on FBN. Maria Bartiromo just joined. I use a bunch of folks at FBN who are really great at covering the markets, covering the economy. Peter Barnes is in Washington, use him a lot, and Melissa Francis up in New York. You're right, there is this autonomy in shows, and there is a line actually between news shows and opinion shows. There are times when shows do something that is really captivating and raises a lot of questions that leads to another day of following up on that line or that thread. But there's not a lot of communication between each show about taking, it's really each show for themselves is how they've set it up. And mine is unique in that I'm separated from the mothership, which is in New York. I'm in DC. And, we focus a lot on DC news, world news, and then obviously the panel at the end. But a lot of things that you see through the day, we're watching, and if there's something that's really intriguing or an interesting line, the beauty about the show is it changes late in the day. So my show could change 4 or 5 times before 6 o'clock Eastern time. And on the best days, it changes at 5:55 because it's live and it's happening and something's going on. And that's what I love as a news guy. The panel is organic. I come up with topics. That's it. It is a discussion. Charles Krauthammer speaks in verbal op-eds. That is not practiced. It is not like we do a script. It's just a conversation. And that's the beauty of those guys. They come, and women. They come to that table like thoroughbreds at the gate, ready to come with that topic, but the conversation develops as we're there.
We're going to go back here. There she is.
This is Jim Brett. Thanks,
Hey, Jim.
Thanks for your sharing your experience and your journey. But recently, a couple weeks ago, you did a radio interview with Hugh Hewitt, what happens to be our favorite radio voice out here. 3 things, make it quick. How, through the chaos, you missed George Bush's a phone call. It went later to voicemail, I do believe.
It did.
And then second, you got a wonderful name in the hospital and how it paralleled your journey. And there's a wonderful name in the hospital now, a ward named after him. And then the third and final, are you in touch with the donor of the family?
Great questions. Thank you. First of all, there was a call from President Bush. I was chief White House correspondent. Tony Snow at the time, who was, by the way, battling his cancer, was reaching out all the time to find out how Paul was doing. And he had shared that with President Bush. And just a couple of days before the surgery, the first surgery, the president called my cell phone. I was in the middle of, with Amy, talking to our cardiologist, Dr. Gerard Martin, and I looked at the phone and it said 202, and I just didn't pick it up. And it went to voicemail. And it was the best call I had ever missed, because President Bush left this nice message that I know I'll play at Paul's rehearsal dinner down the way. 2, I think you're talking about Joe Robert, who was a philanthropist in D.C., a friend of ours. He actually died of brain cancer, but his son was in the hospital, and he wanted to change the place. We became friends, And before I met Amy, I was friends with this gentleman, Joe Roberts. And he gave $25 million to the hospital. And it was the Joe Roberts Surgical Center. And as we were wheeling Paul down for his first surgery, I looked up and saw the Joe Roberts Surgical Center. And I thought, you know, this is something. I respected this guy, I knew this guy, and here our son was rolling into a surgery room under his name. We became friends, and we raised a lot of money for that hospital, Children's National. And unfortunately, he passed away, but we recently were at a memorial service and happy to recognize him.
Back here.
Hi, Bret. Thanks for being here. I was wondering if you believe, or maybe behind the scenes, you hear talk about this president and whether or not the scandals that are revolving around him reach to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors.
So, on a number of fronts, you know, the I word in Washington is not talked about that much in the wake of President Clinton's impeachment. That I think the Republican Party looks back at what happened with how that rolled out and says politically, while it was, they believe, the right thing to do to go after that impeachment, politically it hurt them in the big picture. So it has not been something that has been the focus yet. Those talks, those words, those conversations have increased in recent weeks as there have been more and more things outside of congressional authority. So where there are real questions both on the Republican and Democratic side about going outside of the purview of the balances, the branches of government. And you know, when you have Jonathan Turley, who is a left-leaning professor of law, talking about the abuses of executive power that are happening currently, I think it raises some eyebrows. It's not a conversation that I think politically in this environment is moving forward, but I do think that that there are being serious questions raised about executive authority and what's happening.
We're going over here now.
Thank you for coming. I'm Carol from Tulare, California.
Hi, Carol.
2 questions. Number 1, I'm enamored with Dr. Ben Carson, and I wondered if I know you've spoken with him, is he really that genuine a person? And number 2, when you're going to be #OneLuckyGuy?
For Outnumbered, the show in the afternoon. I've desperately tried to stay away from it, but I may be up in New York and do it. It's a fun show. Ben Carson, Dr. Ben Carson, is a genuine person. He is, as he speaks on TV, that is how he is. You know, the political insiders say he's almost too genuine, if that's even possible. But there is a sense that he has a groundswell of support. And I wouldn't be surprised if he put out and started to raise money and start a campaign. How far that would go, where it would go, how many people would sign on, I think remains to be seen. But he is a genuine person. What he says is what he believes, and that's an interesting thing for a politician.
We're going to go back here.
It's great to have you here tonight, Bret.
Thank you.
Historically, the media has been very objective, and I think for the crowd here tonight, in past years, that's been the case. But it's become so politicized lately that we feel that the government is no longer challenged by the media, and that we no longer have an advocate in the media. So how do you think that?
I don't know if you talked to Ed Henry in that White House briefing room. He does.
Well, I mean, there are certain channels that we appreciate,
yeah.
But how do you see that affecting the political climate as we go forward, and how is that ever going to change?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I think that there are reporters who try extremely hard to battle the culture, the media culture. I really respect Jonathan Karl with ABC. He asks tough questions to both sides. There are a number of others who I think are stepping up their game. If you watch those White House briefings, real time, you'll see some really tough questions. Some of them don't make it to the story that airs on network news, which is intriguing and interesting, and I think says something about the environment. I hear your frustration, and it's really a frustration that led Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes to start Fox News Channel. They felt this niche was not being serviced. The niche happens to be half the country. But I think there is this sense that some of these stories are surpassing the filter. They're becoming too big to not cover. This IRS email story, I'm sorry, it surpasses belief that just the emails from the hard drive to the White House are the ones that are unretrievable. That just doesn't seem to hold water, and I've talked to a lot of IT people about it. So those kinds of things are breaking through, I think, what you're calling that frustration.
We're going to take two more, and the first one's right there.
Hi, Bret. It's great to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
Loved the story, too, to share it with us.
Thank you.
If you had to pick your favorite all-star panel, who would be on that panel for your show?
Again, this is live streaming. I have a lot of favorites. Dr. Krauthammer is obviously, he's been my first baseman. Since day one. In fact, I had a conversation with Roger Ailes, my big boss, when I took over, and I said, do you think we could have Dr. Krauthammer 5 days a week? And he said, you sure you don't want to have him 4 and they want him more on the 5th? And I said, boy, if he's around, it would be, I think, good for the panel. So as much as he's available, we have him on. I think Steve Hayes is a personal friend of mine. He does a really great job. And I went to college with Steve. We went to DePaul University together. He's actually a year below me, despite his gray hair. We were in the same fraternity. We were Sigma Chi's together. I like to say I hazed Hayes, but I didn't really. And I tell you, there's so many others. A.B. Stoddard is a wonderful person who's been covering the Hill forever. And she is just a great, great lady. Mara Liasson has more institutional knowledge about Washington than many, many people do, and can present it in a really balanced way. She presents what the administration is thinking. And I tell you what, Juan gets a lot of grief, but he's a great person. And you don't know sometimes where he's going to come out. You really don't. And I think he's a real asset to us. I think that having George Will as an addition to the panel has been a great thing. The stable is never ending. Jonah Goldberg, we're going to have on more. He's very funny and has a great perspective on things. If you know great liberal columnists, let me know. As many of them are signed up with other networks, and we've tried our best to get some great voices, and I think we're starting to work some more in.
Okay, for our last question, we're going to go back there.
Bret, thank you for the work you do and sharing your story. I've recently, a few months ago, became father, so I was very touching to hear, new father to you. God bless you.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you if you think that political correctness is a good thing or a bad thing for this country.
So how do I answer that correctly? First of all, congratulations on your new edition. Second of all, I think political correctness gone wild is kind of a story that we cover a lot. It ends up in the grapevine quite a bit. Political correctness on steroids. And we've had quite a bit of that in recent months. Listen, there is a discussion that happens in the nation and obviously it gets heated at times. And as we get closer to elections, it gets more and more heated. Political correctness has a place in making sure that the discussion doesn't go overboard, I suppose. But the stories that we hear about people not being allowed to say something, or you can't say this, or you can't say that, usually that leads to a big uprising in those communities, one way or another. I like to say that the pendulum swings in America, that Americans, they get it eventually, collectively, and it's an amazing system that we have. So that was kind of a politically correct answer. So I apologize. Let me just leave you with this. This story, this book, is really, when you boil it all down, is a love story. It's a love story about me loving my work. It's a love story about me loving my wife. And it's a love story about our family loving and caring for our son. One of the love letters from President Reagan, he was then Governor Reagan, to Mrs. Nancy Reagan, really struck me. And here it is. He was governor of California. My darling wife, this note is to warn you of a diabolical plot entered into by some of our so-called friends. Calendar makers and even our own children. These and others would have you believe we've been married 20 years. 20 minutes maybe, but never 20 years. In the first place, it is a known fact that a human cannot sustain the high level of happiness I feel for more than a few minutes, and my happiness keeps increasing. I will confess to one puzzlement, but I'm sure it is just some trick perpetrated by our friends. Again. I can't remember ever being without you. I know I was born more than 20 minutes ago. Oh well, that isn't important. The important thing is I don't want to be without you for the next 20 years or 40 or however many there are. I've gotten very used to being happy, and I love you very much indeed. Your husband of 20-something or other. That was for their 20th anniversary. So this October, I'm married to my wife, Amy, 10 years, and I don't want to be anyplace but with you. So, thank you very much for having me. Real pleasure.
Thank you. So I want to thank you for coming. I don't know if this mic, there we go. Thank you for coming. That was great. So what we're going to do for everyone who's sitting out here, remind you, we are selling his book out in the lobby right there. 100% of the proceeds go to support those wonderful causes. So buy one for you, buy one for a friend, buy one for your neighbor. We're going to remove this podium. We're going to ask that you line up, I guess your right, and then we'll bring you up on the stage for the signing, and you'll exit that way.
And I'm happy to take pictures if you want to take pictures.
So great. So thank you.